Hello everybody, it's Tim Woodman here from Woodman Coaching, and I can see we've got a few attendees in the room already, so that's really good. Hope you're all good. Hope City Base is treating you well, and that you've enjoyed what parts of the summer we've had already, and still got some to go. The session today is about performance management, as you'll see on the main screen here. So while you wait, I wonder if you can just message me back with saying that you can actually hear me. Okay, so if you could just type in a message just saying that you can hear me, that'd be great. I have my colleague with me today, Charlene Bear. She's of German and origin, so her English is pretty good, but she might struggle with a couple of the words, but she's here to help me from a technical standpoint today. So if you don't mind just letting me know that you can actually hear me, that'd be great. I'm assuming that everybody can hear me, which is good. And while we just wait for maybe a couple of the others to come and join us, then perhaps you'd like to give some thought to and maybe send me a message with regards to the sorts of performance problems you might encounter in the workplace. So what sorts of problems do you actually come up against that you have to deal with? So it'd be interesting to see what you guys have got to say about that. So I can see I'm getting some affirmatives on the hearing, so that's really good. So yeah, just while we wait a couple of minutes, I normally give folk a couple of minutes before we kick off. If you'd like to maybe think about perhaps what are the sort of performance problems that you face with your staff, the sorts of things that you might have to deal with. Obviously I'll keep them confidential, so I guess nobody will know whose is whose, but I might refer to a couple of things as we go along. I have a whole list of things as we go on. So maybe tell you a little bit about what I've been up to just while we fill a couple of minutes. My triathlon season has kicked off already this year. Did a qualifiers up in Nottingham and tried to qualify for the British team. Unfortunately, I'm not very fit at the moment, so I was found out, if that's the right way of putting it. So I'm probably not going to manage to get into the Great Britain team this year, which is a bit disappointing. But I'm setting my sights on Chicago for the World Champs next year. So watch this space as I hopefully get fitter and fitter. Things are good for the business itself. We are progressing really well, and these masterclasses are becoming quite popular, especially for businesses like yours, where we're dealing with folk who are geographically spread around the country. This masterclass approach has been working well, and the feedback that you guys are giving me is obviously helping me to get a lot better. So we've had some thoughts already, and we're probably about good to go. We're about 5 minutes after the start time, so I think we'll kick off. Today's session is the fourth masterclass that you guys will have been on, and the first three really were all about sort of setting things up, your role and responsibility. What does the manager, how does the manager add value as an individual, beyond just making sure that production is happening, whatever that might look like. In your particular cases, obviously that's about making sure that service is there and that your clients are happy. The second masterclass we covered was all about managing yourself in the first place, so that you created time and space to be able to become a better manager. And then about managing others. So how do you actually engage people? How do you, to use that oft used word of power, but do it in a way that that the person being empowered is not left feeling like they're the only ones in the room with the responsibility. So we talked about that. So it's about managing yourself and other people. And in the third masterclass, we thought about leadership and how leadership affects other people's motivation, and what we can do, what actions we can take to become better leaders, and therefore by being better leaders motivate people through them following us. Today though, we're focusing in on probably the most difficult scenario that most managers feel that they face, and it's probably the most difficult one to deal with as well. And so I'm going to try and share with you some thoughts about how to manage performance in the sense of how to deal with some of those really difficult situations. I'm going to share with you some problems, and I'm going to share with you some principles and processes, and some of the skills and some of the outcomes of those skills. Obviously, this being a masterclass, it's not something that we can practice one-on-one together, or to view or observe other people actually doing it. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that are the key focuses on when you're having a one-to-one with somebody, how you actually might deal with that. So today, my expectation is that we should be a little bit closer to the hour and a half today, rather than the hour and 3/4 or maybe 2 hours that we've been on previous master classes. This is a relatively simple, straightforward, but actually the difficulties in how you actually make it work. So let's think about today and think about this situation. I wonder, have you ever been in a situation whereby you couldn't really be bothered to actually do the work that's in front of you? In other words, your boss is not in the room, you've got no real pressure to perform, and actually you've managed to while away maybe an hour or so without actually doing stuff. You may have been feeling very tired, lethargic, maybe straight after lunch. Maybe we're in that position right now. Maybe this is giving you that break that you need, who knows. But have you ever wondered, what has your boss got to do to actually get you motivated to perform at that situation? Well, to be fair, I never really thought about it before becoming a trainer, and then thinking about how I actually help people to manage poor performance or performance better. And I guess it's never really occurred to me, and I've been in situations where that's been the case. If I go back to when I was a young man, I just started out as an engineer. I was in a drawing office at that moment in time. We used to block out some of the sounds from the shipyard by wearing earplugs. And directly after lunch, I often, because I was a rugby player at the time, I was training quite hard, I would fall asleep directly after lunch. And it was really easy because we had these huge, great big desks that were tilted upwards. We sat on a bar stool in effect, and we used to draw on these huge, great big drawing boards with all the blueprints on there. And quite often it was quite tedious work. So directly after lunch, with the sun on our backs through the windows, so to speak, it was very easy to actually fall asleep. And so the head would clonk and hit the desk, and eventually the boss would come round, and I'd be hugely embarrassed. I'd blush hugely at that time. But here's the interesting thing: I still did it. The next day, I think I fell asleep. Probably the next day, there was something that the boss hadn't done that put me in a place where I just didn't feel that I needed to do something about it. It was almost that I'd accepted it as part of the situation, unless the boss did something about me or threatened me with being fired. I don't know. I hadn't worked out what he needed to do to make me stop falling asleep, and I hadn't figured out that I needed a bit of caffeine, maybe to boost my energy levels up, maybe a breath of fresh air or something, maybe stand up instead of sit down. There were things that I could have done but didn't, but only in reflection those situations are the case. ways. So think about it from that perspective. You've got folk that work for you, and at times they may not be completely fired up because of the circumstances. What is it that you've got to do to be in a place where they'll actually make that happen? For them to actually be motivated to perform in those circumstances. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you today these three things. We're going to look at what's the problem. So we're going to have a session on what sorts of problems can you come up against, and what you might and how they might be categorized. I'm going to share with you some principles which managers should abide by when dealing with these problems, these poor performances. And then I'm going to share with you a simple meeting process that will allow you to have conversations with people and the sorts of skills that you might need to employ to make that happen. So that's the framework for today. At the end of it, of course, you'll be needing to be thinking about your action plan and also give me some feedback. We'll send out the emails with the framework. It's very similar to the ones you've already had, but I need those back that I can see that happening. And from a feedback point of view, how was it for you, so to speak, and help us to understand how we might improve. So that's the plan for the next hour and a half or so. So we should be done by 4:30, maybe a little bit earlier than that, perhaps. So let's crack on and look at the main situation. So here's what the problem is. Now, I don't want to blind you with science a little bit, but this is called a Gaussian curve, or a bell curve. You might have heard of it. And just to sort of describe it a little bit, you've basically got the average number of people. It typically sits in the middle, so the average number of people will actually achieve a certain level, or there'll be a certain number of people that achieve this certain average performance, so to speak. As the performance gets stronger and stronger, so from 0 to +3 here, as performance gets stronger and stronger, the number of people that are able to provide that performance drops. That's only natural. Likewise, on the reverse side, that as performance drops away, also the number of people that drop away. So that's called a bell curve. Statistically, a simple situation. And I'm using this because to describe performance from the perspective of performance issues. And where you have, on the one hand, the star performers. So this lady here is pushing you as the manager and saying, look, I'm working really hard. I want you to stay on top of it. I need more work, blah, blah, blah. These sorts of people really make it difficult for us, which in the sense of they're really quick, that they're often a pleasure to work with, but quite demanding of you in terms of your time, because they're so very quick. They're always thinking about things. They've always got good ideas. They're very active, very proactive in the way that they do things. And these star performers are the people, obviously, that we want to keep in the business. But very often, because we don't stretch them very hard, these people are often the very people that do leave us because we're not able to manage the performance really well. And of course, it's about having plans, it's about having stretched targets, it's about being able to manage their expectations along the lines that we've already discussed in what is it that they've got to be good at, and also how they've got to be good at things. So to use an example, a particular delegate that I had contact with a few years back was one of these star performers. He was a salesperson, and he thought he was so great. He was great at what he did. Obviously an excellent salesperson because he always hit his targets and more so. But actually on the how-to side, he wasn't very good. He was often leaving difficult problems for the folk behind him. And whilst being a star performer, he also was he also exhibited poor behaviours, and therefore he became quite time-consuming. So these star performance, whilst there may be only one or two people in inside the organisation, certainly with you guys, you may have maybe one or maybe two. You guys maybe only manage 2 or 3 people in total. Maybe that you don't actually have a star performer, so to speak. But they're often very challenging in the sense of the amount of time that they take up with us, and so they take up quite a bit of our time. At the other end of the scale, we have these people, and forgive my graphic here of you bashing your head against your laptop in pure frustration, by the way. We have the poor performers, the folks that really don't pull it out for you. They're consistently behind. Their behaviour is often very poor. They're not producing. They're not hitting their targets, and they're often a particular concern of ours. And because of this frustration, we're often left in a place where we're not really certain what we can do or how we should manage these people. And often we feel that by maybe just leaving them alone, they'll actually sort out their problems and things will go away. However, they do consume an awful lot of our time and our space. And the question I have for you, who are the people that perhaps are down here for you? Who are the people that perhaps are down here for you or up here for you? And maybe then thinking about, okay, so if a lot of time is taken up managing the poor performers, and a lot of time is taken up with managing the star performers, what's the implications with the guys who are actually in the middle, the guys who are the steady eddies, perhaps, who are delivering, relatively speaking, that they're getting close to their targets, or they're doing the work that you expect them to do, and they're pretty sensible. It's probably true to say that most of us as managers spend little or no time with these people because our time is taken up by the star performers and the poor performers. So the question I have for you is, what's the impact on people who are in this middle band here when they see the inordinate amount of time that we have to spend with the poor performers because they're performing poorly? We may involve human resources, we may involve senior management. It takes up time and effort on our behalf to manage the poor performance. We often don't do it very well, we often leave it alone, and the poor performance continues. Likewise with the star performers, what happens is if we don't spend time with those guys because we're spending time with these guys, then they get left alone, then they get disenchanted and they actually start to slip back, their performance starts to slip back here. And vice versa, it's the same with the folk in the middle. If we're spending so much time here and here, then what happens is, because we're leaving these guys alone and not paying them as much attention as perhaps we should, because it just isn't the hours in the day, then what happens is their performance starts to slip back. So the bell curve starts to move towards the left-hand side of this particular graphic. So this is the situation that we're faced with, and one of the problems and issues that we have is that as managers we see this poor performance, and we often take or have the reaction that if we leave it alone it'll go away. So we think that if we sweep it under the carpet, eventually it'll resolve itself, and perhaps that will happen. We're often fearful of trying to deal with it because we're unsure of the reaction that we're going to get from the individual themselves. It may end up with us feeling like we're in a conflict situation, and because we're unskilled at being able to deal with or have conversations with people in these arenas, then what happens is we tend to shy away from actually dealing with them. The consequences, of course, is the people in this area see this that is going on, and they're thinking to themselves, why doesn't this person, this manager, actually deal with this situation? And why aren't they addressing it and dealing with it? Well, the truth of the matter is most managers, and this is my experience in talking with and working with a lot of managers over the past 14-15 years and training them on managing performance, is that that's exactly what happens. They tend to shy away from it. They're nice people. They tend not to want to bite the bullet and create a conflict situation. It may end up with a situation where you're in conflict with the individual, that then ends up being escalated into some kind of challenge from the individual into the situation with regards to yourself. There may be accusations of being singled out. There may be all sorts of different things that then come from that. The extreme of which is if you end up in a court of law having to defend yourself. And to be frank, most managers don't want those sorts of things to happen. And because they don't wish to end up in a court of law with a constructive dismissal claim hanging over their heads and them being the potential cause of that, this is why a lot of managers actually don't deal with these situations very well. And it's true to say that it is a two-way street, though. If you want to try and deal with this situation and the other party doesn't, then it does put you in a situation where you do have to then take some hard business decisions. And that's where I would always recommend that you work with your human resources folk to make sure that you're on the right side of the law with regards to that, because there are many pitfalls going down that particular route. However, it's a route that sometimes you have to take, because it does take two people. And in my career, I've been in that situation a couple of times already, where I've had to make hard business decisions about whether an individual fits, whether they're prepared to even try to make it fit. At the end of the day, I'd rather not have a square peg in a round hole, because it's just as damaging for the individual as it is for the business in not resolving those issues. And frankly, most individuals will be better off out of that situation, and given the opportunity and maybe the little help to do something about it, because they'll be far happier individuals. Now, I'm not suggesting that's always the case, of course, but that's often the case. So let's think about this in terms of managing performance. So what are the issues that most managers come across during their time as managers in the sense of managing poor performance? So let's just think about it from this perspective. So let's look at the performance problems, and these are some of the problems which I picked up over the passing years, which I'll now share with you. And I think we've had a couple of responses there with regards to the sorts of things that you might have come across. So let's perhaps look at these from the perspective of the way that we things. So one of the things I hear quite often from people is that poor timekeeping is one of the things that is an issue. The thing with poor timekeeping, though, is that it's very measurable, and this can either be lateness, and that's very measurable. They turn up on time, or they don't, as the case may be, and therefore it's factual in its description, and therefore theoretically should be relatively easy to deal with. However, timekeeping with regards to absenteeism, i.e. just not turning up for work and then perhaps claiming illness, is a little bit more subjective in the way that you might look at it. So that's one particular type of situation that you might face. Here's a situation that we perhaps find up with ourselves. People do things wrong. Maybe they have different priorities. I'm currently coaching an individual who seems to persistently get his priorities wrong, and his boss is finding this quite a frustration. the reality probably is it's the boss that should be getting the coaching rather than the employee. However, the individual has been brought to book, so to speak, with the fact that they are doing things wrong. Again, this is a relatively factual situation to deal with. The person's either doing it right or they're doing it wrong. It may be that they're technically not capable of doing it, or perhaps need retraining or training. So relatively straightforward to actually deal with. But that's another type of performance problem. Upsets other people. This is perhaps now moving into the more difficult arena of performance problems. To give an example, somebody may be aggressive toward one of their work colleagues or toward clients, for instance. They may be towards their bosses, towards their peers, towards other people in other departments when going about their business. And they upset the other party. This is often described as a personality clash, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and it's often used to describe something that says this is something we can't do anything about, and therefore we're just sort of going to wash our hands a little bit of it and just put it down to being a personality clash. And the way that folk then go about dealing with it is that they then manage it by either moving the person on, or keeping people separate, or putting them into a different job, and managing it poorly from that perspective. So, in the sense of it upsetting other people, there's often different ways that may happen. So it may be that they upset the whole of the rest of the team. They may say things that are sort of in team meetings that are throwaway comments. There may be some two-facedness. That may be the way that they go about things. In other words, that they may say one thing to the person's face, and behind their backs they're saying something completely different. It may be that they're upsetting people outside the team, and they're doing that by just the way that they're behaving. It may be also that they're just being rude to the individual, maybe not listening to people, maybe talking over them, maybe not really listening to what's being said, especially if you're in a customer facing role. Sometimes to try and force a particular solution on people is what happens when we're upsetting people. Now, this is obviously quite difficult, because if we take the mind's eye or the mind view of the individual behaving in the way that they're behaving, they may be absolutely shocked to realize that they are upsetting other people. Rare, I have to admit, but that may be the situation, that actually they do find that they're upsetting other people, but they're actually not even aware that they're doing it, and it may be the first time that this has ever been brought to their attention. So we might find that the individual finds this quite difficult to understand. In my experience, most people know instinctively or intuitively that their behaviour is not appropriate for the circumstances. However, it's very subjective in its nature, and it's very difficult to perhaps have a conversation with individuals where you're saying, well, you're upsetting somebody, and they say, no, I'm not, I'm just doing my job and I'm doing it properly. So it's quite a subjective situation to come across. So that's something that we'll look to address a little bit later. So let's look at perhaps something else. So the over or under engineer, in other words, you delegate a task to somebody and they either find out every different way that they can to solve a particular problem and not get on with it, or that they take the reverse view of this, which is they find any old solution and just enact upon that, and which is often not good enough solution for the particular place that they're in. So this over or under engineering, again, could be a little bit subjective, but it's more likely to be factual, these circumstances. So again, perhaps a little bit easier to actually deal with where you've got a factual situation. This attitude is the next one, and of course it's this could be all sorts of different types of attitude. Indifference is sometimes aggressive behaviour, arrogant behaviour, the sort of the know-it-all type of attitude. Lots of different descriptions that we might have here. Again, very difficult to deal with because individuals may argue back that they're actually doing the best job that they can, and it's just your problem or the other individual's problem with the situation rather than with their attitude. So very subjective in how we actually might deal with this situation, and often the attitude one is very, very difficult. Lazy is another performance problem. Skiving off, doesn't do the work that you tell them, or they spend hours actually doing something. You might argue that maybe the over or under engineering, or the over engineering, or is choosing to do different things, has got perhaps a different priority, different ways that they're looking at it from that perspective. Again, laziness is sometimes quite difficult to understand or deal with. This is perhaps slightly off the beaten track a little bit, but I knew a guy who used to slip away for a pint of beer around about quarter three. I think he probably had an issue with his drinking, but he'd slide away. And whenever challenged where he'd been, it was always either toilet or visiting somebody or solving a particular problem. But in fact, he was off doing other things. So let's look at the next one. This is the job's worth. Okay, it's more than my job's worth to do something different. Often this is quite a subjective choice on their behalf. Do they have a job description? It's often the factual end of the situation, but sometimes we end up with that sort of attitude coming back from people. Next one, doesn't use... sorry, I've forgotten what this one's about. Doesn't use their initiative. This should show. I don't know where that's gone, but I'm missing a word there. Forgive me for that. But doesn't use their initiative. This is all about perhaps a person following the letter of the law or doing exactly what it is that you tell them or what they think they're being told there. So that's that one. Poorly or inappropriate dress. So here's a situation: somebody turns up for work in jeans and t-shirt. Is that appropriate? Well, I would suggest that obviously this is a factual thing, but again, it might be open to interpretation. Depends on whether you've got a dress code. Whoops, pardon me for that one. I hit the wrong button. I'll come on to these two, the health and personal things, in a minute. So poorly or inappropriate dress could be quite subjective, because certainly us men folk would find it a little bit difficult to perhaps comment on the dress sense of women's fashion right now and what's appropriate or not, as the case may be. Perhaps a little easier if you're a woman in managing that situation, but certainly from a male perspective here, it's often quite difficult to say, well, is that appropriate dress or not? And it can be quite a subjective issue. On the other hand, if you have a dress code, it will be relatively straightforward to work with that. Let's look at the health side of things. And now here's a really difficult situation. What if somebody has poor body odor, for instance? How do you deal with that? Beyond sort of confronting them, if that's the case may be. Again, it may be quite subjective. The individual may not think they have body odor, may not even realise they've got body odor. Maybe it's bad breath. I had a work colleague who was a sales guy, and his breath was appalling, and I had to take him to one side and have a conversation with him. And the reaction I had was quite disturbing from the individual. So actually being prepared and ready for it, certainly, but it's again, it's probably health is probably more on the factual side rather than the subjective side. Although there is some subjection to how often somebody washes or as the case may be. Let's look at the personal side of things now. We're now getting into perhaps a quite difficult situation. How do you deal with drugs, for instance, or drink? What's the policy of the organisation? Any drugs or drink on site? Certainly in the places where I've worked, it's been totally not appropriate to drink or very definitely not to take drugs on the company's premises and to be under the influence of that. But it may not be clear for you. Certainly, that's worth working out. But again. Somebody being under the influence of drugs, how many of us would actually be in a place where that's we'd be able to recognise that? One of my friends is a forensic nurse, and her capability is to be able to recognise individuals who've been arrested, to be able to determine what drugs these guys are on just by observing their behaviour. Now, not in a month of Sundays or a month of training would we ever be in that situation where we'd be able to cast that judgment. So it becomes quite a subjective issue for us to actually have to deal with it. Likewise, from a personal perspective, drinking, although relatively straightforward to actually smell somebody, smell whether they've been drinking or not, whether it's it was only just one in the pub and it won't make a difference. Depends on the policy that the organisation has got. How about long telephone calls? How about surfing on the internet? Personal issues and dealing with personal things. Again, unless you catch them red-handed, or if there's a suspicion, how do you actually deal with that? It can be quite subjective in the way that we might view these things. What about stealing? If we've got suspicions but no proof, although if you have the proof, then of course then it becomes factual. How about smoking breaks? For instance, those of us that don't smoke, we don't take 10 minutes out every hour to just go and stand outside and have a cigarette. So what's the company's attitude towards that, and how many smoke breaks is appropriate? Somebody who smokes 40 a day, who's spending 10 minutes out every time, or 5 minutes out just having a cigarette every time they want a cigarette, how much is that? Well, that's 5 minutes to get there and to come back. That's 200 minutes. That's 3.5 hours a day, i.e. half the day has been spent standing outside not doing anything. And again, it could be subjective how many times, unless you're willing to actually measure, but then you run the risk of alienating the individuals because they feel like they're being watched. So there's an upside and downside here. And perhaps the one that's most difficult is sometimes what about relationships within the work environment, certainly with married folk or unmarried folk. Affairs on site can often cause issues between individuals. Maybe the people involved in the situation, both inside the affair and outside the affair, may be affected. So it may cause an atmosphere and environment. Again, how do you actually deal with those things? So I hope this has given you some kind of a feel for the situation that actually that could happen from a performance management point of view. And what we're going to talk about today is how do you actually deal with these situations. So if I think about, or if we think about this, what are the skills that we actually need to be able to handle these situations? Well, we need to be able to observe what's going on. We need to make some judgments as to the subjective issues that people may have, and we need to have a process to be able to deal with that, and I'm going to share that process with you just now. But you also need the skills of questioning and listening, You need the skills of objective setting. In other words, you want this to be resolved, so how do we resolve it? We need to set objectives so that we know that the situation has been resolved. We need to have good time management skills, because we need to make sure that we are on top of these things and stay with it. And we also have to have good observational skills and being able to read other people's body languages. So there's quite a number of skills that we need to use with dealing with these situations. So before I get on to the actual process, let's look at sorry, before I move on there, any questions at this point? If you've got any questions, if you'd just like to type it up and let me know what, if you've got any questions that I need to answer, I'll try and pick them up. Charlene, I'll field those as we go along. I'm just going to put you guys on mute because I need to talk to Charlene for a second. Okay, I'm back online now. Perhaps one of you could just type that you can hear me. Just maybe one of you, if you can just make sure that I'm still in contact. So I'll keep talking from this point onwards, because there is a little bit of a delay from you guys typing and me getting the answer. So what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to move on to the principles behind how we should deal with this as managers. So the conclusions that we might draw from, sorry, before I do that, let's draw some conclusions. I'm in front of myself here. So this really is the hardest part. We can often be quite shocked by the responses that we may get. We may get anywhere between absolute anger, storming out, to absolute non-committal, blank, almost no recognition of what's going on. But this is probably the hardest part for most managers, is how to deal with the subjective poor performance of other people, or behaviours of other people. One of the things that that may happen for us is that we inherit. So we take on a department, or we may get promoted. Quite a number of you guys have been promoted upwards. It's maybe that you have staff that have behaved in a particular way, and they actually don't. They exhibit some of the things that I've shared with you today already from a poor performance point of view. You've inherited them, and the previous manager hasn't dealt with them, and you're in a situation where you've now perhaps got to face up to this and deal with it. We often procrastinate, we often meditate on the situation, we often hope that the situation goes away. We've inherited it, so it's often quite difficult. We're perhaps relatively new to the management role, and therefore because this is the most difficult part, we often put things off in the hope that actually things will get better and go away. We often lose goodwill. People are pushing back at us and getting quite aggressive perhaps in their behaviour, and this often makes life quite miserable for us. I was coaching somebody from the police about 1.5 years ago, and they'd lost the goodwill of the people that they were managing. They were in the marketing team and the one of the police forces, and they lost the goodwill of the individuals because they'd actually inherited this particular team who'd been left alone. They'd been behaving poor behaviour for quite some years, in fact, the new manager attempted to do something about it. They didn't deal with it particularly successfully, and consequently lost the goodwill of the individuals that were working for them. And then we also may need human resource or senior management support. We often and certainly I've heard this from many HR managers and senior managers, is that it's not my job to deal with these. The managers should be dealing with these situations back at the workplace. But of course, if you're not trained, if you don't have the systems and processes to enable you to do that, it's often the best way to do things is just to give it to HR and say, look, I've got this problem, will you deal with it? But the difficulty for you is that you're then being seen to delegate the responsibility to somebody else, and that will reflect as weak leadership. So let's have a look at some of the principles now. So these are some of the things which we should abide by. These are some of the things that we should use as our principles that will guide the way that we behave, such that we actually deal with these difficult situations really, really well. And the first thing that we must do is we must recognize that we must try to motivate upwards before we motivate out, which I think is a lovely phrase. In other words, make sure you think about helping these people to become better at what they do before taking the decision to move people on. When I'm coaching people, and I have many examples of asking the question, so what do you want to happen with this individual, when they're describing the individual's particular behavior, and they say, well, actually, frankly, you know what, I've given up, I don't know what else to do, I'd rather they were, that we could just fire them. And that's quite difficult, because if you have that attitude going into trying to help individuals, then actually this motivating up bit is very difficult to then act on, because the person who you're dealing with will instinctively know that you've already made your decision and that they're on out, and that could in itself make it very difficult in terms of their perception of the situation and the way that they may behave. So motivate up before motivating out, and that's something that should really challenge the way that you see things. Recognize it's your responsibility. In other words, think about this. It's your responsibility, nobody else's. And the reason why it's your responsibility is because this will directly affect the way that people will see how you are leading them. And if you delegate the dealing with these difficult situations to other people, what will happen is that your team, the people around you, will see that you are not taking responsibility and not facing up to the situation. Now, there's no other way of describing this, but somebody said to me the other day, it's time you manned up, Tim. It wasn't about poor performance, but I hasten to add, but it's quite a good phrase, isn't it? Or man up or woman up, whichever way you want to take it. In some instances, you just have to steel yourself and you have to deal with it. It's sometimes not very pleasant to have to go into this, unsure of what's going on or what might happen. But if you do your preparation at the end of the day, and you do it with skill, then most people who actually still want to work inside the organization, who want to keep their jobs, will actually respond and work with you. For the few that decide, actually, I don't care what you do, I've behaved like this all for the last X number of months, years, whatever it might be, why should I change? Then you're in that place where you actually have to manage them out of the business. But in the first instance, it's your responsibility to attempt to deal with this in an informal way. So the process is all about you dealing with this in an informality, in a way that's helpful to the individual, helpful to the business, and helpful to the way that you're being perceived as a manager and leader. So take responsibility for yourself. Do not pass it on to HR. Do not pass it on to your senior managers. This is your responsibility to deal with it in the first instance. Choose the style. You might remember we talked about situational leadership last time out. So choose the way that you're going to deal with this. So the particular style, are you going to be particularly tough-minded? Tough empathy is something that we talked about in terms of displaying inspirational behavior, maybe you choose to delegate, maybe you choose to be directive. There's lots of different styles that you may choose, but choose the style that you actually want to adopt in this particular circumstance. Deal with the individual. And here's somebody who's definitely not motivated, who's horizontal in their motivation, and therefore sleeping on the job, a little bit like what I did. But the key point of this is deal with this person. You'll notice there's a blanket on here. Very often we deal with these things by sending out an email to everybody in the team. Will the person, can we all please note that we are due to start work at 9 o'clock? Can you all make sure that you're here by 9 o'clock? All you will do here is you'll hack off all the other people who are going, we know who it is, we all turn up on time, it's that person. Haven't you got the gumption, the toughness, the capability to go and talk to them and deal with it? Because if you don't deal with it, then I'm going to start turning up late, and then we've got a much more difficult. So don't take the blanket approach to this. Is deal with the individual themselves. In other words, don't try and throw a blanket over the whole thing and hope that the individual who's got who you have the performance issue with will actually pick it up and run with it, because they won't. And all you'll do is actually upset the individuals who actually don't want to upset. So help people to succeed is the last point I want to make from a principal's perspective. If you want people to go up the graph and become more productive, you genuinely have to help. Now, this is quite difficult, because if your perception or your view of this individual is they're a lazy, good-for-nothing nobody who won't get off the backside and work for me, and I'm getting really frustrated with you, and I don't know what to do, so I'm almost going to give up, then you won't be able to project this image of actually really wanting to help people to succeed. So from that perspective, it's really important that you put your own mindset in a place where you can actually help the individual. And to do that, you've also got to really understand where they're coming from. It's almost the Pygmalion effect. If you go into there expecting them to fail, guess what will happen? They'll fail. So anyways, think about it from that perspective. Okay, so principle, the final principle I'm going to share with you is this one, and it's this. So what is the problem that we start with? So if we think about this in the perspective of the problem itself, I've already outlined some of the issues or problems and subjective and factual that you might face. The difficulty that we have is with defining a particular behavioural problem. Now, of course, what we're looking at there is somebody who's asleep, and what we're looking to try and achieve is to get to a place where the individual is defining, well, what should it look like? Of course, they shouldn't be asleep. They should be jumping up and down and being happy is what we actually want. So what's the behaviour that this person is displaying? And in defining the problem, and in the meeting that we are conducting with them, this informal meeting that we're conducting with them, we should be looking to define the behavioural issue. And behavioural objectives are based on the premise that you can observe the behaviour. They're often about the things a person does or doesn't do. So in this particular case, being asleep is their eyes aren't open. That's a description that's very obvious in this. They may not smile. They may not meet and greet. Their voice tone might be difficult. Their eye contact may not be what it should be. although simple, they're not always easy to describe. So describing somebody who's flat out on their backs with a blanket over them is obviously relatively easy to describe. But I'll share with you some thoughts in a minute about perhaps some of those subjective issues, like, for instance, aggressive behaviour. What does that actually look like? Describe it. It's sometimes quite difficult. So, although simple and not easy to describe, but with thought, you can draw up the behaviours so that you and the person, the person with the performance issue, are clear about what's required. So we can define where you are right now. We can define what your behaviour should look like when you get to a place where we know you've actually cured the problem. So you might want to break the behaviour down into component parts. So what will be facially happening, what will be happening from a body language point of view. You may also want to check the description by asking yourself, can I actually observe this? Can I see it or hear it? Because that's a behavioural description. Compare what you have described with perhaps behaviours of good performance. Be clear about the actual behaviour that you've observed, compare it to the behaviour that you desire, and it may help to visualise the behaviour of your best person against the behaviour you have and describe that gap. So in other words, what's the gap look like between A and B? Finally, it's not always practical to describe every piece of behaviour involved as a behavioural objective. However, most people will understand what you need if you describe as much as you can at that moment in time. So let's give you perhaps a little bit of an example here, and let's just think about poor teamwork. So what does poor teamwork perhaps look like? And a behavioural description might be doesn't participate at meetings. In other words, that's a big descriptor of doesn't say anything, doesn't look at people, doesn't look engaged, maybe sits there twiddling their thumbs. So I might be able to describe that non-participation. Poor team player might be described as does not help others when there's a shortage. In other words, they are able to observe that somebody is finding things a bit difficult, and they don't stand up and help when they actually got quite a light workload. Heard to be negative about change initiatives. In other words, we'd expect to see positive behaviour, but we're heard to hear them perhaps running down, "Oh, it's never going to work," using those sorts of phrases, even though they may be trying to help the situation by saying it's never going to work because of this, this, and this. In other words, why are we wasting all this money trying to achieve this? Maybe they refuse to do extra duties. Maybe does not enlist help from others when should, or maybe leaves work to pile up when others are away. One of the things that we do in this organisation is we make sure that the email boxes of the individuals that have been away for a couple of weeks on holiday, they come back to an email box that's empty. That means they can start afresh and they haven't got mountains of emails to get through. So the point of all of this is the more specific you can be, the better it will be when it comes to actually making sure that we're able to deal with it. So let's just think about now the next. So having defined the problem itself, let's just get ourselves ready for the sorts of things that might happen. So being prepared, we're going to talk to somebody who may or may not know that the behaviour that they're exhibiting is A, being observed, and B, is being observed as something that's negative to the performance of the team. And by that I mean we talked about maybe performance. It might be worth just sharing what I mean by that. Performance management in the sense of what they deliver might be exemplary, but how they go about their business might be absolutely poor and is leaving a a whole pile of problems behind them. You might remember I mentioned the sales guy that I came across. He was an absolutely exemplary salesperson. He was really, really good with the clients. But when he was back inside the organization, he was an absolute nightmare. His behavior was arrogant. He was demanding things of people. He was creating frustration. People couldn't talk to him, wouldn't talk to him because of his whole attitude to the internal folk. But his targets were absolutely smashed out of all sight, and therefore was seen almost as being a great individual for the organization. The reality was, though, he was probably costing the business more in turnover of staff because people would leave because of him, etc., etc. So the sorts of reactions we might get to the criticism, because that's how they might perceive, is ones of sadness. We may get, people start shouting or screaming at us. We may have displays of real frustration. People might actually run away. They may just say, right, I'm not taking this from you. I'm just going. But they may just say, well, that's it. I'm talking to my lawyer. So they're on the phone, and we might get that. I have to say that's probably quite extreme. But they may, want some counselling. They may, if you're part of a union, and I'm pretty certain you guys aren't. But those may be the situations that we're having to deal with. And from the individual's perspective, they may go through a whole host of different feelings and thoughts. They may have shock. There may be in some cases some denial. This isn't happening to me. If I just bluff it out, it'll go away. It may be, oh no, that's not me. I'm not doing these sorts of things. It must be somebody else who's ratted on me. Who's telling you these things? This isn't happening. I'm one of your best employees, etc., etc. So there may be an awful lot of denial here. It's often very difficult. You may get this anger. You may get disbelief. These are behaviours that are relatively common in some of these circumstances. Sometimes it starts off with shock, followed by denial, then anger, then disbelief as they start to maybe realise that you're not going to let them get away with it, and then maybe at some point acceptance. Oh God, yeah, perhaps it really is me. This is the way things are happening. I don't know what to do. Followed by some hope as you start to work out some kind of plan that helps you to actually resolve the circumstances and the issues that they actually face. So that's something to be mindful of. So let's talk about how you actually go about dealing with this. So we are talking about now how you can conduct an informal conversation with somebody who is behaving in a way that is deemed to be poor, in the sense of it might be affecting the morale of the team, it might be affecting your capability as a leader, and maybe directly having an impact on the performance of other people. So here's the 7-step process that allows you to actually deal with this circumstance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the process here, and I'm also going to talk to you about some of the difficulties people face when trying to actually handle these particular areas. But this is a great way of dealing with not only poor performance, is actually having conversations with people about just simple situations or problems, and it's actually quite it really is a good way in actually helping people to deal with situations. So the starting point is we have to outline the area, and what I mean by this is that we have to outline the business reason. Sorry, not the business reason. We have to outline exactly what it is that's causing the problem, and this can be quite difficult. And therefore, this is the very first step here is something that you do need to think about, and think about quite hard the words that you're going to use to work with this. So, for instance, let's take somebody who is quite assertive, bordering on arrogance, and this is something we want to pick up with them, because actually it's stopping good communication within the team. People are stopping to talk to the individual, and therefore it's harming good teamwork. So outlining the area would be I've agreed to meet with this individual. Again, that's something you need to think about. So look, I need to have a conversation with you about something that's private and important. So I'd like to talk to you about it whenever you're available. It's about performance, and it's something that we need to talk about in private. It's how I would set it up. And then once I'm in private with an individual, I would typically say, look, here's the situation. I need to talk to you about this. It's something that you and I need to resolve. We're doing it in private right now. This is really informal, and gives us the opportunity to sort this out sooner rather than later. And the issue that I need to talk to you about is the way that people are perceiving your behavior, and your behavior has been perceived as being a little bit certainly very assertive, but bordering on the side of arrogance. At that point, you might get some kind of response. Oh, who's saying this? Well, I would normally keep this to myself. So it's information that's come back to me. It's information that perhaps I've observed myself. I'd like you to just listen to what I've got to say first. And we'll talk about what we do about it just now. But just hold fire with wanting to go out there and maybe have it out with other people. That's the difficulty you face. If you say, oh, well, Joe Bloggs said this, then what might happen is they stand up, walk out and go and harass Joe Bloggs. So you don't want that to happen. So you have to be quite careful about how you actually deal with this. Then stage 2 is really important, and it's explaining why you have a problem. And the explanation should be around the problem itself, in saying that the reason why it's a problem is because here's the business reason why I have to clear it up. So for instance, somebody's arrogant or very assertive behavior bordering on arrogance may be affecting teamwork. People don't feel like it's affecting good communication, and therefore poor communication will affect teamwork. And there's the business reason why you need to deal with this. You are the manager, you are paid to maintain motivation, in fact to grow and to improve motivation, to improve teamwork, and thereby by doing so improve results. That's how you add value. So this is the reason why you're dealing with it. Now, for all of these subjective issues, there needs to be a business reason why you are dealing with this situation. Now, it could be that you've historically inherited an individual and their behavior, and then you go to address it and they say, well, hang on a minute, I've been behaving like this for the last 20 years and it's always been all right with other people. Well, that's where you say, well, I'm sorry, my observation of this situation is that actually it's harming good teamwork. It always has harmed teamwork, and it's my job to improve teamwork, and this is a problem that we need to resolve. And therefore that's the reason why I'm doing it. What this does is it takes it away from the opportunity for the individual to turn around to you and saying, well, you know what, you're just picking on me, you don't like me, you've never liked me, and I'm now going to take you to HR, and etc., etc. So what you use is the business problem. I'm a manager, I'm paid to improve teamwork, I'm paid to improve motivation, I'm paid to improve results, and all of those things are part of my remit. And the behavior that you're displaying and choosing to display is harming some of these things, and that's the reason why I'm dealing with it. Not I'm picking on you because I don't like what you're doing. So this really does sweep away, and it quite often happens where the individuals say, oh, well, you're just picking on me. I say, no, I'm not. I'm dealing with this because it's a business problem for which I'm paid to deal with, and that's the reason why I'm dealing with it now. You sometimes get to the old timers say, oh, well, you know, I've behaved like this most of my career here. And I said, well, that's no reason to not deal with it. I'm relatively new in this role. And just because other past managers have allowed it doesn't make it right. and here's what we're going to do about it. So I would plan numbers 1 and 2, steps 1 and 2, quite well. I would do the talking here. I would be making sure that I'm in control of the conversation through putting my point of view across. And very often, especially if it is quite a subjective issue, I would practice this not only with by myself, but also with perhaps somebody else who can give me some feedback. And I'd be thinking about have I outlined the area well enough so that they are absolutely crystal clear about what it is that we're doing. Excuse me for a second. I would also explain why it's a business problem and why I have the responsibility for doing something about it, because that then takes away their accusation of it being a personal vendetta against them. So I'm typically doing most of the talking. They may come up with some things. Oh well, that's not right. Who do I go and challenge? Who's been talking behind my back? And my response to that is, you and I are going to sort this out. It doesn't matter who out there has this perception of you. I have this perception. Certainly, if that's the case. If it isn't your perception, then you just say, look, it's other people's perceptions, and therefore I'm having to deal with it because I'm your manager. That's what you need to know right now. Let's deal with the problem to start off with, and then we can talk about how we go about it. Then we get to stage 3, and I have worded this very specifically. This is about then getting them to talk. So asking them for the reason or reasons for the behavior that they're displaying, and it's at this point that you need to handle the conversation really with a lot of strength, in so much that the more the individual realizes that they're behaving like this and in an inappropriate way, the more they'll try and deflect you, they'll try and take you off track, they'll try and find any other reason for not dealing with the problem. And you keep having to bring them back to what I want to understand is, what reason do you have for behaving in the way that you're behaving? So let me give you an example here. So somebody's acting quite assertively, but going beyond that to being perhaps displaying some arrogance. I will have got them to understand that that's the issue through parts 1 and 2. I'll then say, so what's causing you to choose that behavior? Note I use the word what rather than why. Why is asking for justification, which is what you'll get, and that will make it really difficult for you. So what we're looking for here is the reason behind the behavior, not why they do it. You're not interested in why they do it. You want to understand what's causing them to do that. So it may be that the individual comes back with an answer that says, well, you know what, I don't think I'm being assertive or arrogant. In fact, actually I find the other party to be in that situation, and actually it's all their fault, and all I'm doing is standing up for myself. So what's causing you to behave like that? Well, I feel like I'm being attacked. Okay, so your response to feeling attacked is to attack back. Is that what's going on? Well, yes, it might be. Okay, so I now sort of understand, as his or her manager, the reason why they're choosing that particular behavior. So that's what you want to find out, is what's the reason for them behaving in the way that they do. So I feel like I'm under attack, so I respond appropriately in kind. So at this point, I'll ask the question, okay, if I think I understand now that we've got to the root cause of the problem, and it may be at this point you might get a whole pile of symptoms and not the real root cause of the problem. Well, it's because they're idiots. Might be, that's a symptom. I'm often first thing in the morning. I just don't get out of bed very well, and that's it. Oh, okay. Is it really that, or what else is it? So I might keep digging at part 3 to make sure that I really do understand what is the problem that these guys have faced, because if we resolve that, then the whole situation goes away. What I then do is I ask for ideas and possible solutions towards how they might solve the problem. Again, recognize that I'm asking questions here. I'm doing very little talking. If they try and engage me in conversation, I will always bring them back to, look, that might be a situation which is something that we want to deal with, but we're not going to deal with that right now. They may come up with all sorts of excuses. They may blame other people. Well, yes, but you're not dealing with them behaving like this. I said, well, I will deal with them. If you think that that's the case with them, then I will deal with the situation with them, but I'll deal with that situation with them by themselves. I'm now dealing with your situation about where you are. And this is not about waiting for somebody else to do something. This is about you making some kind of coming up with some ideas as to how or possible solutions that we might have. So I would make sure at this point that I keep questioning and say, well, what other solution would there be? Sometimes you get at this point, well, I don't know. You're the manager, so to speak. Well, actually, yes, I might be the manager, but in this particular circumstance, this is about you coming up with solutions to solve your problem. Because if it's your solution, then you're more likely to deal with it yourself. So that's what I'm looking for here. Be very careful. I see a lot of managers at point 4 come up with lots of ideas themselves. What then happens is when it doesn't work, it's your problem because it was your solution. So you need to keep asking the questions. So what solutions? And don't hang your hat on the very first one. Push them into coming up with a number of different solutions to the problem. If they go, well, I don't know what the solution is. Well, okay, take 5 minutes out then. I'm just going to go and get a cup of coffee. Do you want one? Fine, sit there and come up with some ideas. You go back and say, well, I don't know how I can solve this problem. And so, well, okay, then it sounds to me like you need a little bit longer. So I'll give you half an hour. Stay here. When you've come up with some kind of solution, or also maybe comes and get me. So in other words, you're asking them to be adults, because quite often in section 3 and 4, they start acting like, I don't know what the answer is. You tell me, you're the manager, etc., etc. It's really important that you get people to really deal with this situation themselves and come up with solutions themselves, because if you don't, you'll end up opening yourself up to that opportunity of them not solving the problems themselves, and when it doesn't work, then blaming you because it was your problem in the first place. So having got some possible solutions, and make sure it's plural, i.e. there's quite a number of them, then you offer help, and what you say is, look, I am your manager, I'm here to help you. This has been quite a difficult situation for me. You might want to share that with them, and I am here genuinely to try and help you to resolve this issue. I will do absolutely what I can to help you in these circumstances. And there are lots of things that I could do, but this is about you and you solving the problem yourself, because I can't do it for you. But I am here to help, and I'm here to act as a sounding board to help and guide you as best I possibly can. And if there's any help that you can that you need beyond telling other people what to do, because this is about you choosing to behave in a different way. And often I then describe the situation saying, well, this is about behavior. This is not about undermining who you are, not undermining your principles, not undermining who you are as an individual. This is about you choosing to behave slightly differently so that you get a different output. Very often in these circumstances is about perception. Our perception of somebody in the way that they behave can be radically altered by very small changes in behaviour. Again, I was coaching a manager about a year ago. He was getting some very poor reactions and behaviours from some of the people around him, and we talked about him changing how he might go about things. He came up with a couple of solutions, and in the end it was actually the solution which where he changed his behavior very, very fractionally, it made a huge difference. Just that he was using I rather than we, and just by using a slightly different choice of words seemed to make huge differences to the people that were working around him. So it's at this point I might share that with them. It's about perception. It's not about changing who they are. The business recognises they're still producing, but we want to make things better. Number 6 then is about agreeing objectives, and in agreeing the objectives, again, those objectives needs to be theirs. They need to be behavioural in their description, back to the slide that I showed you earlier. And then finally is the review dates around what is it that, or when should we review this? Now, I'm a great believer in making sure that it's their review dates rather than mine. Although I will negotiate better review dates. I don't want to leave this thing, oh, well, let's leave it for 3 months. In 3 months' time, the situation will still be there. I do want to check to make sure that they're on track and that things are working. So that's really, really important in the way that actually you go about checking to make sure that they're agreeing or they're holding their side of the bargain. So these are the 7 different steps. Let's just review them again. Numbers 1 and 2 is where you do most of the talking. 3, 4 is where you are eliciting information from them. So good questioning techniques here. Help and agree objectives. Sorry, help side is where you're offering help to them. So you're talking, and agree objectives, review dates. You're getting them to give you that information. So I hope that gives you a nice, clear idea on how to use this. And I use this informally because what you'll find is that if you do this 1 or 2 times with people, what happens is it gets out into the team. They realise. The rest of the team realise that you're not going to be taken for a ride, if that's the right way of describing it, that actually you're prepared to face up to things, that also you're prepared to face up to things in a in a professional manner, which is what this system provides you with, is that opportunity to really deal with these really difficult subjective situations in a really professional manner, in a way that everybody can understand what the solutions are and how you can work towards them. So let's have some of the key points that we may find from managing this these circumstances. First and foremost, you need to retain empathy in some quite difficult situations. The reasons why people behave at work very often don't actually relate to what's going on in work. They often relate to what's going on outside of work. People are stressed out, difficulties at home, maybe they've had a bereavement that people don't know about, maybe they've got financial trouble. There's all sorts of different reasons why people find it difficult to or why they behave in the ways that they behave, and it's sometimes quite difficult to actually talk about those things. Sometimes you have to deal with the situations where people are having difficulties in their family life at home, and understanding and knowing that that's the situation, you can at least agree with the individual how you go about allowing this individual to actually deal with those circumstances at home. But meanwhile, of course, they still have to work. So finding the right balance between providing these people with a little bit of space to work out what's going on in their private lives, but meanwhile also being able to make sure that things are happening appropriately at work, because you still have a job to do. So remember to retain empathy in difficult situations. The process helps you to get to the point early, and that's the key thing here. Steps 1 and 2, you need to practice and plan and map out those first steps in detail, because it helps you to get to the point that says, here's what the problem is, here's the reason why I'm going to deal with it, and that enables you to set off on a sound professional footing. But this process helps us to get to that in a way that makes sure that the situation is dealt with. It's often about perception. Arrogant behavior may be perceived or is perceived by some people as arrogant. Other people might perceive it as just forthright and forceful behavior, sometimes required in some circumstances. Being accused of being arrogant is often quite difficult for individuals, especially if they feel that what they're trying to do is look after and protect the business and the people in that business. So it's often about perception, and changing other people's perceptions is often about just changing or choosing to behave slightly differently. I had an individual who worked for a manufacturing organisation, and we were doing some group coaching with himself and a number of other managers, and people were suggesting that he was quite an arrogant individual, and was often very forceful, very difficult, bombastic to deal with, and this individual had no clue that that's how he was being perceived. And once he realised it was about perception, if he chose a slightly different way to behave, then people's perceptions of him would be of an individual who's totally passionate about the business, passionate about the products that they made, and passionate about the company being successful. He was able to change that by some very slight changes in behaviour, and just created a different perception in people, and that's what you can achieve with that. From your perspective, the slower that you go, the more controlled you'll appear, and the calmer that you'll appear. We are often quite nervous, quite apprehensive of dealing with certainly the more arrogant individuals, if that's the right way of putting it, or arrogant behaviour in individuals. And that's often back to we're not quite sure how people are going to behave, and therefore we end up trying to rush things. The slower that you go about this, the more controlled you'll appear, and the calmer that you'll appear. And likewise from the individual themselves, don't get into a shouting match with individuals. Is remain calm. So slow and calm. Keep bringing people back. So this is a business problem which I have to resolve. If you won't face up to it, you'll put me into a position where I will have to deal with that differently. Right now, you have an opportunity to talk with me in private, in confidence, and we talk it through and we come up with some ideas on how. But that means you've got to shift from where you are right now, which is denial, and start to think about how you actually go about dealing with this, because other people, including me, have got this perception of you. You can change that by behaving in a slightly different way. So we deal with it in a slow and controlled and calm manner. Make sure you're addressing the problem and not the symptom. In other words, when you say, so what are the reasons, not why are you behaving like this? What are the reasons that are causing you to behave like this? Well, don't know. Okay, well, you know what the behavior is. Something's causing you to behave like this. It's up to you to decide whether you're going to talk to me about this, or whether we just sit here in silence until you talk to me about this, but we're going to deal with this. So you can be quite firm in these circumstances. And it's a judgment. Is this something that they have got control over? In which case then it's a problem. Or is it just something that's happening to them? Then it's a symptom. Yeah. So you need to work on the things that say, actually, here's the situation, this is what I deal with. I mentioned this already. Plan the first steps in detail, so make sure that you're word perfect almost for the first sentence, and then you've got a good strategy that you can then follow using the informal meeting structure that I've just shared with you. So making sure you've got those first steps in detail and sorted out, that's really, really important, because that will also give you confidence on how you're actually going to resolve that. I very often use the words we versus I, or we versus you. We are here to solve this problem. We are going to find solutions. I'm inclusive in my language, in the way that I actually conduct those meetings. and then answer. Whoops, it's gone. The last one there is answering a question with a question. I've pressed the button too early, so my apologies. So answer the question with a question. So one of the techniques that people will do is, oh, who's saying that then? As well, you know, notwithstanding that, back to the question, which is what's causing you to behave this way. So that's it, folks. It's a little bit shorter than the other three, but naturally so. I don't know if you guys have got any further questions. If you do have those, please, you can either send them on the chat line right now. I'm going to keep it open for another 5 minutes or so. We may just then just mail you back directly, or I might pick up the microphone and work with it there. But in essence, that's the key to it all. I hope that you've enjoyed this particular session, and thanks for listening. And the next part of this is coaching is up next, and also don't forget we'll be emailing you the feedback and actions, and also we'll be sending you probably tomorrow by the time it's uploaded a link to this web class, so you can go through some of the points again, and maybe if you haven't taken notes of some of these situations or some of the systems that we've got there, or the procedures that we've got there, then you'll have the opportunity to do that. And then just finally, just while we close this down and leave this to you, we've got coaching up next. We don't have any dates in the diary just yet. I'll be talking with Kylie in the next week or so to make sure that we've got some dates in the diary for me to come up to Birmingham. And one of the things that I'll be reminding you in the email anyway, but that will come out to you when we're fixing up the coaching session, is that we started out this learning journey some months back, where you decided you wanted to achieve certain things. I'll also be looking at the action points. So if you're not up to speed with some of the actions, and some of you aren't up to speed with the actions for the last masterclass, please make sure you're up to date, because I will be looking at these. And before we actually meet up for the coaching, I'll be insisting on making sure that you've passed me those actions, so that we can use those actions as part of the coaching sessions to actually look at what has actually happened, and look at how you then move forward from there. So the coaching session will be around the action plans that you've set yourself, around the objectives that we set ourselves between the two of us that you're trying to achieve, resolving any unfinished business in the coaching session itself, but also setting you up with some thinking to how you continue to practice. We'll be sending a couple of emails out before then, some more text messaging and stuff on a random basis now. Hopefully you're practicing on a regular basis and thinking about your practicing on a regular basis by now. So I hope that's good. So that's been about 5 minutes. I think we'll probably just mute microphone now. So thanks very much. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next month or so on the coaching sessions. Goodbye.